So this is a sample course that actually I'm teaching personally on poetry. So it's a poetry reading group that I host bi-weekly. I share a poem and a few articles or ideas around that poem, and then I give people a chance to discuss and read together. So let's say that I wanted to schedule some reminders around this. Of course, I could set things that you're familiar with, things like a start date. So let's say that I wanted to set a start date on this. I knew that it was going to start on September 16th. The morning seems like a nice time. Maybe I actually want to bump that up a little bit. I'm going to bump it up to 7 a.m. because I want people to be able to read this or experience this before their workday. So I'm going to bump that up. If I want to, I can lock the content. You're probably pretty familiar with that idea of locked content. Now it's an option in the scheduler. It's not a default for start dates, but I can lock that content. I'm actually not going to lock this. I want people to be able to access it beforehand if they want to. But the lock date works really well if you want a very strict schedule to keep people on a very kind of real-time path. That works really well. Of course, I can set an end date too, so I'm going to set that for about a week later. How about actually a week and a half? So I'm going to give everybody a week and a half, and we're going to move this end date to 10 p.m. Okay, now I'm working with adult learners who are really taking this path for fun, so I don't want to really mark it as a hard due date. That's something that happened by default in the old scheduler and reminder system in Pathwright. Now it's optional, which is really wonderful. So if you, like me, often end up teaching adult learners, you don't have to mark something as a hard due date. You can mark it as a soft due date, which is what I'm going to do here. I'm going to leave this unchecked. I could check it if I want. And when I do that, it's going to send out slightly more aggressive reminders about things being due. That works really well if, for instance, you are a professor at a university who's teaching a class and there's a paper coming due. You actually want to be a little bit more insistent about reminders, right? Or if, for instance, there's a certification deadline for a course that you're teaching, you want to be a little bit more insistent about those due dates, but we're going to leave this unchecked. Okay, so that's scheduling at its basic. You'll notice now that we've scheduled this entire lesson, which is really cool. So now our learners are going to hop in here and they're going to see this entire lesson scheduled from the 16th to the 25th. We can add more individual due dates here on these steps if we want to, but that's not the really cool thing about the new scheduling and reminder system. The really cool thing is the ability to be able to customize reminders. So not only can you set due dates and have a little bit more customization around locked content and due content, but now you can also add custom reminders. Okay, so let's say that on September 16th, I want to send out a few custom reminders for my learners so that they are incentivized to hop into this lesson. So I'm going to hop in here to the introduction step on this lesson. Again, this is starting on September 16th at 7 a.m. Let's say that on the 16th at 8 a.m., I'm going to say this content, we can actually just put it at 7 a.m. like the entire lesson. I want to say that this content starts, but I want to add a custom reminder. All right, so this might look pretty new. This is functionality that's really never existed in Pathwright. So before, when you set up a start or due date, there would be a reminder that was sent automatically 3 hours before whatever time you selected. Now, actually, we have a lot more granular control around when we send out reminders. So we can send out reminders minutes before, hours before, days before, and after, which is really cool. I'll get into some of that maybe a little bit later, or we can talk about it personally on a call. But let's say that I want to send out a message 10 minutes before this step starts. And I want to send it out as, You know what? Actually, for this, an email notification alone, not an in-app notification, probably works pretty well. And I want to send it out to all learners. So I've got this, pre-written message here. This step starts soon. I like that. I think that works pretty well. But what if I wanted to write something a little bit more provocative? So now in Pathwright, I can customize this message. So what if I wanted to, again, this is a poetry reading group. So what if I wanted to kind of ignite my learners' imagination and get them really incentivized to come and read this poem with me? So what if I write something like, okay, so that might seem a little bit weird. We're actually reading this poem called A Meditation on a Grapefruit, which makes a lot of sense. It's about a guy kind of writing about his experience of preparing this grapefruit that he's about to eat. So I'm going to write this more provocative kind of email subject line. I'm going to use this really cool tagging feature in Pathwright to include my learner's first name. But then I'm going to personalize this content a little bit more. So I'm going to say, hi, my learner's first name. Okay, so now what I've done here is really simple, and it may not seem like a lot, but from a course designer's perspective, and if you're someone who wants to engage your learners in the learning experience, this is really essential. So I've actually reached out to my learners here with a personal message that actually pulls them into the course. You'll notice down here that I'm giving them a direct link to start this course. And instead of just sending out a kind of generic message of this course starts now or this step is due now, I've actually used this custom messaging feature to incentivize my learners to learn together, which is really fantastic. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. So now we've got this message that's incentivizing our learners to come into the learning experience with us. Now, what if I wanted to do something that actually, let's say, that helped my learners along the way? So, this second reading, let's say that it's due on September 25th. That's when our lesson ends. So we can, actually, let's do this from the lesson level. I think that'll be even better. So we'll go up here to the lesson level. We've already set our due date here on this entire lesson. And let's actually set some reminders to help our learners prepare for the ending of this lesson. So what if we set a series of reminders? We've got, 10 days here between the start of the lesson and the end of the lesson. What if we set up a series of reminders, let's say 7 days before this is due? We're going to send out an email to all of our learners. And we're going to say poetry reading tip number 1. And then I'm just going to include, maybe a generic tip that I would share with anyone about how to read a poem well. It might be about, how to appreciate line lengths or how to appreciate vocabulary. But we can schedule this tip, and then we can go right back and we can schedule another reminder, which is really cool. We can schedule multiple reminders for this course. We can set this one for 5 days before this is due, and we'll call this poetry reading tip number 2, right? And now we can share our second tip down below. So it might not sink in quite yet how dramatic and cool this new feature is, but it really sums up and enacts something that I've been saying at Pathwright for the last year, which is as teachers, as educators, we should design our communication like we design our content and our curriculum. So it doesn't just matter what we include in our path and how cool we can design that with blocks or other technologies we can embed. It matters how we talk to our learners. And now with this custom reminder system, we can actually fine-tune how we're communicating with learners so we communicate right on time when our learners need us, and not just in an administrative or bureaucratic capacity. So here's one more example. Start and due dates have really typically traditionally been used to encourage learners who are behind. But what if we actually used these start and due dates to encourage learners who finished ahead of time? So what if we said, we've already got a reminder that's set up, 7 days before and 5 days before for these tips on learning poetry. But what if we set up a reminder for people who finished this lesson early? So let's add a reminder here. And we're going to add it for people who finished, let's say, 2 days before. And instead of sending it to all learners or anybody who hasn't completed, we're actually going to send it to anybody who has already completed this lesson. So in other words, they completed this lesson 2 days before the due date. And I'm going to say something like, wow, great progress. And then I'm going to ask them something like this. I noticed you finished the lesson early. I was wondering if I could share some of your thoughts on these poems with other learners. In other words, I'm sending out this message that's encouraging people because they've completed the lesson early. I'm not just using the scheduling and reminder system to nag people who haven't finished yet, but I'm using it in order to congratulate and encourage people who finished early. Then I can turn around and use the feedback that these learners who have finished early, I can turn around and use that feedback to incentivize learners who haven't completed yet. I can pull in quotes and ideas that these other learners have shared who've completed early, and I can share it with people who might still be lagging behind. In other words, I'm creating a more satisfying and intrinsic way of pulling everybody into the lesson, whether they're ahead or whether they're behind of schedule. Everybody can be a part of the learning process in a more meaningful way rather than just being tapped on the shoulder to finish things on time. I'm really excited about the opportunities that this new scheduling and reminder system affords us. By giving us a little bit more control, it also affords us ways to reach and interact with our learners in more meaningful capacities. I really want that idea of designing your communication like you design your content to stick with you. So now when you're designing a course, don't only think about the shape and pacing of your lesson, but think about the ways that you can talk with your learners in meaningful and more personal ways in order to pull them into the learning experience itself, in order to coach them more particularly toward essential deadlines, and in order to incentivize them not only to finish things early, but to finish things not just with the deadline in mind, but with true learning and transformation in mind. So there's a lot more that I could share about how to use these. If you're interested in that, feel free to email us. My colleagues at Pathwright will get you in touch with me, and we can set up maybe even a personal call about how you can use the scheduling and reminder system for your unique use case in your Pathwright courses. All right, I'm really excited to see how you all use this. Thanks so much for listening, and I really hope that your week finishes out well and you have a fantastic weekend. I'll see you.